Hello out there in YouTube land. This is the second edition of Hammer Horror in Order. This is the series that we just started last month, where basically the entire premise is we watch the Hammer horror or Hammer Films horror library and thrillers too, in the order in which they were released. So last month we did the Quatermass Experiment. That was the first, horror movie that Hammer Films released. So we're moving on to the second one that they made, and that was in 1956 with X the Unknown. Now, this was actually supposed to be a sequel to the Quatermass Experiment, but Smokey, we were talking offline about like some of the reasons why that didn't happen. What was the story there?
Oh yeah, Nigel Neal, the creator of the Quatermass character, the writer, uh, for Quatermass Experiment. Uh, he wasn't attached to this movie as a writer, so he didn't give his permission for the filmmakers to use the Quatermass character, or Bernard Quatermass, his first and last name. So the actor in the movie who would have played Quatermass is now his character is Dr. Royce. Well, the last name is Royston. I don't have the first name right, and I can't remember the first name right, but Dr. Royston, whatever the first name was,
Dr. Adam Royston.
Adam Royston. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Which Dean Jagger plays him. So that would have been the Quatermass character had they been able to use it. But you can tell it's still, he's basically playing the same type of he's a doctor slash, detective or whatever you want to call it. Not, he's doing the Quatermass thing, even though he can't be called that in the movie.
Yeah, and they did a year later. They made Quatermass 2 in 1957, which we'll get to
Yeah.
that in a couple episodes. Just
Mhm.
going in order. But I think because of that, because this was supposed to be part of that, and it wasn't, it is kind of counted in the trilogy. And I think some people kind of call this Quatermass 1.5. Kind of joking
Yeah.
like this.
Mm.
This is it kind of squeezes in there, but um, just based on us watching um I keep blanking on the name of the first Quatermass Experiment. This definitely feels like that, right? Although it's
Oh
not,
yeah.
I don't think it's quite as good. And we'll get into our ratings on this one a little bit later. But just directly comparing it, since I think it is fair to compare because it was kind of originally intended to be a sequel.
Also,
You
another thing I guess we should mention that's kind of similar between the two movies is the X in the name. So
Mm.
Quatermass Experiment, it was originally called spelled with the E at the beginning of experiment. But because the movie was slapped with an X certificate, they decided to kind of promote that themselves with the movie. So they dropped the E and just called it Quatermass with a big capital X for the experiment. So this movie's called X the Unknown again because of the X certificate, kind of promoting the X certificate it got.
But Donnie, did you find any dig around in any background information or anything like that for this one before we kind of
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was directed by Leslie Norman. This was only his third movie as director. And Jimmy Sangster actually mentioned that basically the crew.
He was the writer for this one. He wrote
Yes.
the screenplay, yeah, for this one.
Yeah. So he had mentioned that Leslie Norman was so difficult to work with. The crew hated him. Basically, the entire Hammer executives. It just got to the point where this was the last time they ever worked with him. He never worked with Hammer again. But I mean, he managed to do great things without him. Went on to direct Dunkirk and just so many other ones. So yeah, he had a fine career. Still
He didn't want to work on this movie anyways. I think he took it just to work, just to have work, just to direct a movie.
Yeah.
So I guess none of the parties were thrilled at having to work together on the movie. I don't know if it's necessarily nobody said anything because of the writing in the movie or what the movie was. It was just that I guess Leslie Norman wasn't fun to work with, and he didn't really want to be there anyways.
And I think, unfortunately, it kind of shows on the screen a little bit, because just once again, comparing it to, the one that we just watched, Quatermass Experiment, it just falls a little flatter, this film, than that one did, in my opinion. So I think, unfortunately, some of these things that we just talked about kind of show themselves on the screen, or at least in the finished product a little bit.
True. And another thing I guess we should mention here is that anybody who's seen this film, or if you go into this movie and watch it, you'll notice the creature when it finally does show itself, or when the camera shows what the creature is. It is an amorphous blob. But this movie predates the Blob movie by 2 years. So the Blob came out in 1958. This movie was 1956. But really, in Quatermass Experiment also had a blob creature in it, and that was in 1955. So, to my knowledge, I mean, I could be wrong with this, but I believe that the Quatermass Experiment was the first of these blob type movies, because really it's kind of a subgenre in and of itself, outside of the whole Blob franchise itself. So because you had the Blob and Son of the Blob, or Beware the Blob, whatever, and then you had the 1988 Blob remake, right?
And you have the major differences just between those two movies and these two movies that we're talking about, the Hammer films. In that one, it's a blob that came from space, right? And this one, it's a blob that came from within the Earth. So two completely different methods of origin here. The major difference here, though, is that the fact, and I actually paid attention to it, this movie is only, it's an hour and 21 minutes long. You don't see the blob until an hour and 2 minutes in.
Yeah.
Like, until then, it's just implied, like, oh God, what is that? And then, something.
Yeah, you hear the sound like a how do you describe it? Like a nuclear
or it's
atomic
like atomic
sound.
Like a kind of electric crackling kind of sound, and maybe like a Geiger counter type of sound or something. And then something would happen. I will say that I think Dean Jagger did a great job as Dr. Royce in the movie. I mean, he really makes it stand out and makes it palpable. Hold it together, because I don't know if he's not here. I don't know. I don't even know if it's quite as good as it turned out to be, in my opinion.
True. Yeah. I mean, this is one of those movies came out in this era in the 50s, which is we've alluded to in the last Quatermass Experiment one, that it was atomic age movies basically. So there's a specific kind of subgenre for it. There's also a lot of fans of these types of movies. I can watch these types of movies outside of there being any really, even if it's got a lousy script, lousy actors, and all that stuff. And I'm not going to, of course, they kind of endear themselves to you, I guess, if you watch enough of them. But I'm not going to like it as much if it doesn't have as great writing, of course, or good actors or whatever. And Dean Jagger did a great job in it.
Yeah, he would actually, I guess, best be known for 12 O'Clock High, White Christmas, Game of Death. He has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor.
So clearly has a fine resume.
Yeah,
he already had. Unfortunately, no longer here. But I mean, he really stood out in this movie for sure. I mean, I think he did a great job with it, and I just think comparatively, to that first one, it's just it's kind of it's really slow. It's really slow. We're not like we normally do on the podcast. We're not getting deep into we're not giving out any spoilers, so we're not going deep into what happens necessarily in this movie. But I will say, without saying what happens at the end, what in the world kind of ending was that, Smoke? Right? And this, like, that is an odd ending, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah.
It's almost like
I don't know.
In some ways, it's almost like a bad SNL sketch where they don't know how to get out of it.
Yeah, I was about to say, they didn't know, maybe didn't know necessarily what the best way was to end it. So this is what you end up with. Again, we're not trying to spoil it and totally throw out the ending out there. But
I wish we could say, because it's kind of funny. It really is. But like we always say, we definitely encourage you to go check it out for yourself. Like, you come here to listen to us talk about it and poke fun and give you some of the background information, but ultimately you should go hunt it down and watch it for yourself and come to your own conclusion. So I guess that's as good enough a time as any to talk about our final thoughts. We've kind of given our thoughts, so I guess that's as good a time as any to go ahead and give out our rating. So for this one, we basically do the same. It's a star rating scale, right? 0 to 5, but instead of stars, we give out hammers, of course, because it's Hammer Horror in order. So with that being said, we give it 2.25 hammers. That's our group consensus on this one. I think ultimately, and Smoke, you may or may not agree. You know, I'll say I think it just falls a little flat. It's really slow. Um, there's a lot of things happening sometimes where you're watching nothing. You know what I mean? Like you're just literally might be watching a group of soldiers move from one place to another, or them moving trucks around for like a few minutes and stuff like that. Is like it really slows down in some parts that kind of drag it. You know, like you want a little bit more to happen, and it takes you so long to see the monster, so long. I mean, literally the last 20 minutes. You know, before you see it. What do you think?
And also, we haven't really talked about this before on the show. Well, I don't think we mentioned it in Quatermass Experiment, but this was, I don't know if this was your first time. This was my second time seeing it. I remember watching this. I remember dubbing it off of like either AMC or Turner Classic Movies back in, not too far back, maybe late 90s, early 2000s. So somewhere in there. So that was the first time I'd seen it. And the Quatermass Experiment I had never seen before we watched it for the show.
Yeah, I had never seen either one of these movies before we did it for this. So
Yeah, same.
this is all new territory for me, but I enjoyed it though. I enjoyed it for what it is. It's just, it's not just comparatively, it's not as good as the first one. You know, the first Quatermass.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think if you like this kind of thing, you know, if you're prone to like these types of movies, I think you'll enjoy it. But just know that it's a slow pace. You know.
Yeah, like if you're not that into 50s sci-fi movies, then this is not going to win you over.
Probably not.
But if you haven't seen this, if you are really into 50s sci-fi movies, and this is just one that's slid by you for some reason, then I think you will get the enjoyment out of it. You aren't going to think it's not going to be a masterpiece. It's not going to climb to the top of your, 50s sci-fi horror list, but it is enjoyable, I think.
So there you go. We encourage you to go track down a copy, like we said, watch it for yourself, form your own opinions, and then maybe one of these days we'll get to it on the actual podcast. We'll take a deeper dive and give you some of the spoilery thoughts on some of this, because I would like to talk about this one a little bit more where we can actually get into the spoilers of it. But we move onward and upward. This one's going to be interesting because this is going to be our first taste, just 3 episodes in on Hammer Horror in Order, of what I think the movies that kind of made Hammer Films what they became, why they are the legendary studio that everyone talks about. This is kind of where it really begins with the Curse of Frankenstein from 1957, because this is the first time they really, or this is the first time where they dug into the monster films of, like, say, Universal Pictures, 20 years prior to it, right, Smoke?
Yeah, the Universal's re-releases of the classic movies were kind of going around, I believe, around this time in the late 50s, and so they kind of jumped on with snagging that, and we'll just go into that. It's how how they got the rights to it or whatever, and what they did with the rights to it. So Curse of Frankenstein is like, you go from like these 2 movies that we just did, which are kind of like, they're great intro movies for Hammer, they're not like masterpieces or anything, but then they go straight into Curse of Frankenstein with their 3rd movie, and that's just like one of the greatest. And most people who like Hammer films are going to put that movie probably up there in their top 5, I would say.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. That's like I said, this is kind of where Hammer became Hammer, in my opinion.
Yeah.
With this movie, so it's going to be cool, and we get to finally see one of the big, 3 or 4 actors of the Hammer days in Peter Cushing.
Yep.
It's going to be awesome. So I'm looking forward to that. That'll be coming to you next month right here on the YouTube channel. But we also encourage you to go check out our latest Spookshow Rewind, which just came out. That was the last thing that we just put out. Of course, we also have every Monday, 6 p.m. East, wherever you get your podcast. That's where our new episodes are. We encourage you to go over to aaspookshow.com. That's kind of the center of the universe. That'll show you, that'll point you in every direction of what we do on the podcast and here on the YouTube channel. And of course, our other series that we have here on YouTube is Grindhouse Gutter, and we'll be having a new one of those coming up here in the next week or 2 right here on the YouTube channel. So lots going on in the Spook Show universe. You don't want to miss a thing. Please like and subscribe to the channel down below so you don't miss a thing. And we occasionally go live too. Not as much as we used to, but we'll do it from time to time. So you want to be notified when we do that. So for Will, who couldn't join us, Donnie, Professor Smoke, I'm Josh. We're from the All American Spook Show podcast, and we'll talk to you next time.